Thank you very much. I definitely feel a fraud after Pam and Karen and Mick and Mike. Just incredible. I feel honored even to be in the same room. I'm going to talk for 15 minutes. If it's more than that, I know who will wave at me. I got brought up in South Africa for 12 years, came over here. All I wanted to do was to go into the army like my dad did. He was killed just before I got born, and I wanted to do what he did in the same regiment, the Royal Scots Greys. But unfortunately, in between when he did it and I did it, a new rule came in, which was you couldn't go to Sandhurst if you didn't have things called A-levels. And coming from Eton, Eton School, I therefore naturally did not get my A-levels, because so I got sent to Brighton, where they made you get your A-levels, and unfortunately I broke their record, which was not really my fault, because it was that was the height of the mini-skirt era, and concentration was not possible, and I failed the A-levels twice. But basically, if you cannot get where you want to go, you've got to find an alternate route, as we've just had examples. And I found a place instead of Sandhurst called Mons Cadet School in Aldershot, and I went there for 5 months. And if you could prove to the Sergeant Majors that under a situation of stress, you could dig holes in straight lines, you could become an officer in the British Army. And I did this, and I spent a total of sort of, I think, 8 years in the army, after which I got chucked out because I hadn't got a regular commission. Trouble was I didn't have any money. I married 1969. She also didn't have any money, which was sort of bad planning. And so she looked at what I had done, and she decided that in Germany during the Cold War, I had been teaching Scottish soldiers how to ski and canoe in order to stop them beating each other up in the NAFI, which they were doing because they were very bored, because the Soviets, before Putin, didn't bother to attack, and they got bored and they started beating each other up. This was called adventure training, and the taxpayer paid for it. But when I got married, doing it with my wife, of course it wasn't, and therefore sponsorship became the new word. And we started trying to break world records which had never been done before. And out of 37 of them over 40 years, I'm just going to highlight 3 of them, which to me highlight what this is all about, which is, I think it says on the other side, can and will. Well, she, one morning at breakfast, which is when she had her ideas, her name was Ginny, my late wife of 38 years, she decided that because hot expeditions were not getting sponsorship and cold ones were, we would have to go polar. We had, by then, spent an entire winter in Glasgow, but you know, the polar thing, so she decided that what we must do was start ambitiously by doing what no human had ever been done before, which is to go around the world, not the normal way, but vertically from Greenwich to Greenwich, through both poles, 52,000 miles without flying 1 meter of the way. At that time, what we had was a black minivan and a Jack Russell Terrier, and that was it. Unfortunately, I had, whilst in the army, gone into the regiment called the SAS, and was doing quite well, but unfortunately a friend got me to blow up a civilian place with army explosives, and so I was thrown out of the SAS. But what she decided to do was to go to the SAS herself in a miniskirt, not me, and they gave us an office to try and do this particular expedition from Sloane Square. It's now the Saatchi Gallery. We had an attic, which they gave us, an old retired rifle range from the SAS, and we moved in there, but it had no phone. If you want sponsors, and we needed 1,900 sponsors to try and do that, including an ice-strengthened vessel, a ski plane for dropping stuff, we didn't fly, but there was no telephone. So we found a TA soldier GPO engineer who got out of the attic window on the 5th floor onto the roof and clipped us into the MOD phone system, and they sponsored us for 7 years with free telephones. She eventually, out of 800 people, she found just 2 to try to do this 52,000-mile journey without the flying. We found 2 out of 800. One of them had been a beer salesman for Whitbread here in London, had not been on an expedition. The other one, butcher in Cape Town, joined the British Army as a soldier, but their characters were right. You can teach skills, but you can't change characters. So we got together this little team. We got a ship eventually. It took us working every day, every week, every month, unpaid for 7 years just to get Ginny's dream going. Obviously, what route do? You can do dozens of routes. She sent me to a library to find out the best route. I quickly discovered that there was a place called Antarctica at the bottom, which was problematic, and another one, 2,500 miles at the top of floating sea ice. Neither had ever been crossed. So it was a big problem. Nobody on the expedition team had ever been on ice before, basically, but we decided we would go for her dream. I went back from my look in the library, which is actually the library here, and having discovered that no human had ever crossed the whole of the Arctic or the Antarctic, even the experts, I told Ginny it was a stupid idea. She became quite unpleasant. So I therefore went back to the library. But eventually it got going. And I have to say that I'll show you a few pictures of some of the parts en route, but the most difficult one was the one that she said we would find the fabulous lost incense city in the biggest desert in the world, the Rub al-Khali, or empty quarter. She spoke Arabic. And in 1968, we did our first search for the lost city. That's what it looked like, according to the Prophet Muhammad. I used every means of looking. I did 8 expeditions over 26 years trying to find the lost city in this huge desert. Eventually, we tried NASA. That's a NASA professor. What they did was to look from the shuttle at 170 kilometers in space. They took photos of the desert. That is the huge desert. To give you a scale, in between each sand dune area is 80 miles. Down to the edge of the sand dunes, 280 miles. NASA said that the lost city was definitely right out there, and they knew it because when you look through special NASA bioptics at this, even though the outline of the lost city was 30 feet under the sand, they could apparently see it. It's called cheating. And they knew it was the right angle because everything was right angles, and only people make things with right angles, so it must be a lost city. Well, I'm not going to say how we did it, but I rang up Solihull, Land Rover. They gave us 7 special vehicles. We went right out into this huge dune area. To cut a long story short, we got to the NASA site 5 months before NASA could mount their own expedition to their own site. My archaeologist, the best in the world, Dr. Zarins, took one look at the NASA site and he said, this is actually not the lost city. This is a place made by God using right angles in order to fool NASA. So we reverted to traditional archaeology, and on the 23rd of November, 26 years and 8 expeditions after we started looking for it, we eventually found it by sheer luck, nothing to do with NASA, but that's another story. The expedition which I was talking to you about going around the world, basically you can see where the UK is, which is now, thanks to Pam, full of green stuff, down the Greenwich Meridian, through the Sahara. The ship then took us to Antarctica. It is bigger than China and India, and we did the first ever complete crossing of it, but when we got the other side, we needed collection by the old ship, and eventually we sent a Morse code message. In those days, no GPS, no sat-nav, no sat phone. Ginny was the Morse code operator. She managed to get the ship from New Zealand, where they'd waited for 18 months in case we did the first crossing. They collected us and took us up the other side of the world, which basically, when we got out of the ice, which took time, up past Australia, Vancouver, through the Bering Straits. If our ship went in there, it would sink. You've got 3 million ton flows, which will sink you. They're going at 4 miles an hour. So the plan, which she made 10 years previously, we would be dropped off by the ship. They'd go around the Panama and wait a year. We would then go in 12-foot rubber boats, 900 miles up the Yukon, 800 miles down the Mackenzie River, 2,000 miles through the Northwest Passage, 900 miles to the edge of the world, where we would wait for 8 months of dark, cold period, as we had incidentally down south, and then we would set out for the difficult bit to cross the top. It took me 6 years to get that 42-year-old ship. It took Anton Bowering 5 years to find people like chief engineers giving up their jobs on P&O to join us for 4 years without pay. But we did, and they dropped us off on the Greenwich Meridian. We then crossed Antarctica, as I said. We then got up to the Northwest Passage, and unfortunately her plan was wrong because the sea froze before we got to the edge of the world. So we had to abandon the boat. And we then set out. The other guy, Charlie Burton, unfortunately, the skin fell off the bottom of one of his feet and had raw nerves for 400 miles on snowshoes. And then he got hemorrhoids and his language got bad. He then one day fell over and sort of cracked his head on a rock and his eyes filled up with blood and he started to whinge. He basically... But he did keep going. On all the expeditions, we have problems because of the cold, basically, but only if you make a mistake. In those circumstances, you just don't make any mistakes. That particular mistake, 5 months later, I had the top half of all those fingers and thumbs amputated, and that is just made fun of by other members of the expedition. It's a cause for hilarity. Eventually, after 10 years of our lives devoted on one plan, Ginny's plan, you probably can't see us, but we're down there. We'd been out on the moving ice in the roar of breaking ice for 8.5 months. When we eventually got on board the ship, her plan was complete. We completed the first ever circumnavigation of Earth on its surface, 52,000 miles without flying 1 meter, never done before or since. More people have actually been on the moon. But the expedition which I think it's rather different, which did take me a different sort of challenge of can and will, was that I got born with 2 phobias. One of the phobias was basically that even in England, a little spider scared me stiff. I would climb up the curtains to get away from an English spider. It was a dreadful phobia. But when I went out to join the Arab army, those were my blokes. I had 60 of them. We had no helicopters to remove the wounded. We were fighting 4,000 people from the People's Front, communists. They were all Arabs and Baluchis, my blokes, for 3 years. The very first night we got out into the desert, they were all around me. I was trying to impress them that I was a wonderful, even though I was a Christian. And lo and behold, sitting around this fire with them eating goat and rice and all the rest of it, all looking at me, it was 7 inches. It had furry legs and a beak. And I had shorts on, and it came over my thigh. And I just would have screamed, but I was more frightened of losing the respect of these blokes who didn't mind about the spiders. So I confronted the phobia by mistake. And over the next 6 months, they kept crawling over your legs, and they didn't bite you, so after a bit, I realized it was stupid. So a little bit later, like when I was 60, and still had the other phobia, it was irrational. I had vertigo. I had seen people going on the edge of a cliff and looking over and not being frightened, so it must be irrational. So I thought I will confront it like the spiders and get rid of it and then not have any phobias left. So I went to someone who said, well, Everest is definitely where you want to lose your vertigo, because it is the tallest. Well, on the 3rd attempt, I actually did do Everest, and we raised 6.3 million for Marie Curie as a result of that one. But the trouble was, there were no drops. It's just a walk up there. You see white sort of shoulder, but not a proper black, horrific drop, which is what And the bloke who took me up there, called Kenton Cool, he said, Ran, there's a place much cheaper, weekends from the UK, called the North Face of the Eiger, and it's a good place for losing your vertigo. And I've just got a little film of it taken by ITV.
Ran certainly rose to the challenge. I've watched as he's trained over the months in some spectacular settings. If it looks like they're clinging on for their lives, It's because they are. Not hard to see why this is Sir Ranulph Fiennes' toughest challenge yet. Just one part of a long, hard day's climb, and now they have to spend the night here. Phil Ray-Smith, ITV News, Eiger Base Camp. For Fiennes, exposed rock is the most difficult surface to climb. With no fingertips on his left hand, thanks to frostbite, he uses his ice axe wherever he can. Of course, Fiennes' greatest fear is his vertigo, so he ploughs on without looking down, trying not to think of the sheer drop just behind him. Although even an accomplished climber would find a traverse like this tricky, losing your foothold is heart-stoppingly easy.
Look at his wax.
Careful.
Why?
Well, cut the rope.
Oh.
That wouldn't be good.
Yeah.
It's a long way from the flat polar ice where he made his name as an explorer.
The Rand's basically hanging completely above the void.
Not liking it one bit, I tell you.
What did you reckon to that?
Hair-raising, I'm afraid. Not my cup of tea at all. Very frightening.
The good news is that the team are more than halfway up. The bad news is that this is the toughest climbing yet. And Ranulph Fiennes has pledged to raise £1.5 million for charity. He knows that the higher he gets, the greater chance he has of hitting that target.
But as he makes his painstaking progress up the mountain, how far away must that summit seem?
You can see how big the drop is beneath. Pretty scary.
Anytime this would be a struggle, but at 7:30 this morning, after 3 nights on the face, this is mountaineering at its most extreme. Fiennes has not always been successful in past quests, but in this one, victory is tantalisingly close, though not before another night on the mountain. This mountain was his final frontier, and this path, a foot wide with a sheer drop either side, was his final obstacle. But today, aged 63, Sir Ranulph Fiennes conquered the north face of the Eiger.
I just want to end up by saying that one of the worst things on all those expeditions was when you were totally and utterly out of touch, Morse code days. And I can remember one occasion after 5 months on floating ice, on an ice floe which was getting smaller and smaller somewhere up north, heading towards the Soviet Union, which we didn't intend to do. And suddenly he had a solar panel, Charlie did, in the tent, and I was with him for 8 months, just the two of us in a tent. And basically speaking, he had this headsets on, solar panel. We could listen to the BBC World Service for 2 minutes a day if there was reception. And on this particular day, Charlie said, just to show you how out of touch we were, the United Kingdom is at war. So I said, who with? And he said, oh, I didn't get that bit. We sat for 5 days of bad radio reception arguing who the hell it could be. I mean, we knew that Mrs. Thatcher was aggressive, but we could not work out who with. Of course, we assumed it was France, but we had no proof. When they said it was Argentina, we thought that was just a stupid BBC joke. But all the expeditions, basically, or over all those years, if the people on the expedition don't have the will and the can do, then you just ain't going to get anywhere at all. Thank you.